Welcome to Echoes of My Imagination. My name is Tracy Lee. Sit back, relax, let me tell you a story. Today's story is called The Deep Beneath Atlantis, the Etharo-Mariners. Book 2 of The Lost Currents of Atlantis and Mu. Written by Tracy Thompson. Book 2 follows the survivors of the fallen Atlantean civilization as they descend into the uncharted depths, discovering a hidden world of bioluminescent seas, ancient relics, and evolved guardians known as the Etharo-Mariners. As they navigate crushing pressures, extreme cold, and telepathic connections, the remnants of Mu and Atlantis converge, revealing secrets that could reshape the surface world above. Let's get into it. Epilogue. Location. Thousands of years ago in Atlantis, long before the collapse, during the height of scientific experimentation using genetic engineering and modification. The chamber beneath the Atlantean research ring was sealed from the rest of the city. Water still moved through controlled channels along the walls, circulating heat away from the central containment structure. Inside the structure, a massive tank held a single organism, suspended in dense mineral solution. One scientist stood at the edge of the observation platform, arms crossed, his expression hard.
"It's too large,"
he said. Across from him, another scientist adjusted the frequency controls, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "It's stable," she spoke distractedly, interacting with the data projected three-dimensionally in a hologram in the air around her.
"For now."
The organism inside the tank shifted. Its body pressed slowly against the containment field. The outer plating of the organism had not been part of the original design. It had developed during growth, layering itself in response to pressure changes during testing. The second scientist watched the readings. "It adapts faster than predicted," she stated.
"That's the problem."
He didn't look away from the tank. She looked up from her work, turning toward the tank. "The deep ocean stations need something that can survive where we cannot. Pressure, heat, chemical exposure. This creature does all three. We created it with that purpose." The first scientist stepped closer.
"And control?"
She paused. "We influence movement through field modulation."
"That's not control."
The creature's head turned slightly. Though no external stimulus had been introduced, both of them saw it. It wasn't reacting. It was aware. Location. Atlantis. Mid-evacuation during the collapse. The eastern harbor no longer followed a pattern. It had once moved in cycles, predictable rise, controlled return. The water guided cleanly through channels designed to keep the pressure even against the stone. That rhythm was gone. Now the water arrived in uneven pulses, climbing higher than it should, then draining back too far, exposing dark mineral veins that had not seen the light in generations. Each surge carried debris, not scattered fragments, but pieces large enough to show where they had come from. Sections of dock framing still joined at their corners, lengths of copper lattice bent outward where the force had torn them free. Fractured crystal housings that still held faint internal light, flickering inconsistently as water passed over them. Arson stood at the edge of the lower dock with his boots planted wide. The ground beneath him was not still. Small vibrations passed through it at uneven intervals, too light to throw him off balance, but consistent enough that he never fully relaxed his stance. Each one came up through the soles of his boots, through his legs and into his chest. He did not look at the towers behind him. He watched the water. He wasn't watching the wreckage. He was tracking the intervals between the surges. There was no timing to them anymore. The water wasn't responding to wind or tide. It was being displaced from below, forced upward in shifting volumes that didn't repeat. A section of docking frame drifted past. One end splintered, the wood fibers spread and softened by water. It turned as it moved, not carried cleanly forward, but pulled slightly to one side. Then it corrected. Then it pulled again. Smaller fragments followed behind it. None of it moved in a straight line. Behind him, the sound of work carried across the dock where a vessel sat half secured, low in the dock channel, held in place by 4 anchored locks along its sides. Unlike the cargo ships evacuating the main population, it had not been built for transport. This vessel had been modified for depth. Its structure showed that immediately. It was longer than the transport ships leaving from the upper harbor, but narrower, its shape drawn out and tapered at both ends, encapsulated by an outer shell. The outer shell was not smooth. It was segmented, built in layers. Stone formed the base, dense and smooth, shaped to hold against pressure. Each section fitted with pressure distribution rings that could flex slightly under strain instead of cracking under it. Thin bands of metal crossed over it in intervals, each one slightly raised, each one set with a small gap beneath it. The hull was dense, narrow, and reinforced in layers that prioritized resistance over buoyancy. The gaps were not empty. When Arson stepped closer, he could see the movement inside them. Narrow channels ran beneath the bands, filled with a fluid that shifted slowly, adjusting as the vessel settled against the push and pull of the water. The channels did not leak. They flexed. Engineers moved along its length without pause. Their voices stayed low, close to the work, but the strain in their pace was clear in the speed of their hands. They didn't speak unless necessary. Their hands stayed on the structure, pressing, adjusting, checking seals by feel as much as by sight. Tools were used sparingly. Most of the work relied on direct contact with the material, reading how it responded under pressure. Salat moved between them along the length of the hull, one hand trailing the surface as she walked. She didn't rush, but she didn't stop either. Every section she passed, she checked, not visually, physically. Her palm pressed flat against the hull, holding there long enough to feel whether the vibration beneath the surface remained consistent. "Seal integrity?" she asked without turning.
One section is still shifting, the forward ring, one of the engineers responded without looking up from his task. It's unstable under lateral stress. Won't settle cleanly.
Salat changed direction immediately and moved towards him. "Show me," she said. He stepped aside. The housing sat flush against the outer shell, its edge marked by a thin seam that ran in a perfect circle. As Salat placed her palm against it, the surface gave slightly under the pressure. "How far?" Salat asked.
It holds under light load. Past that it shifts, he stated. Too far for deep descent.
She pressed again, harder this time, then released. "It doesn't need to hold past that," she said quietly. Salat's hand stayed where it was, feeling the response through the material. "It won't need to hold at full depth. It needs to hold long enough to reach the structure. We're not staying at that depth." Arson turned from the water and approached the vessel. This was the first time he had reacted.
"You're still sending them below," he said.
Salat didn't answer immediately, her attention on the housing. She moved to the next section of the hull, pressed her hand against it, waited for the response. "We're not sending them, Arson. They chose to go," she said. That wasn't a deflection. It was a boundary. On the far side of the vessel, a man rose, brushing fine stone dust from his hands as he stepped down from the outer frame. The dust clung to the damp skin along his forearms before washing away in streaks as he wiped them against his clothing. His hands were marked with fine cuts from the stonework. Dust settled into the lines of his skin from the task of sealing joints manually. His eyes moved past Arson to the water beyond the deck, then back to the vessel. His name was Keel. Keel had worked in the lower canal systems, mapping water flow and pressure behavior for years. Unlike most surface engineers, he understood how the ocean moved beneath the visible currents.
"The ridge is shifting," he said. "We can't track it from here anymore."
Arson looked at him.
And you think you can track it from inside it?
Keel didn't answer that directly.
We need to see what's happening under the ridge. We'll understand how it's moving, he said. That's enough.
The dock shifted under them again. The movement was stronger this time. A second figure climbed onto the deck behind Keel, carrying a narrow case filled with crystal rods against her side. Lyra, younger but precise. Arson followed her movement with his eyes. Lyra didn't set the case down immediately. Instead, she paused at the base of the ladder leading to the hatch and looked out across the harbor. Not at the damage, at the water.
What are they taking?
Arson asked quietly. Tools that still work, Salat said. I've recalibrated the instruments for pressure distortion, Lyra said, turning toward Salat and Arson. If the readings scatter, we'll still get pattern direction. Salat nodded once. Arson bowed his head in thanks. A low tremor moved through the dock beneath their feet. The water surged outward, then returned, slapping hard against the stone. Keel and Lyra climbed fully aboard. The hatch sealed behind them with a heavy mechanical lock. The vessel's interior closed around them immediately. Inside, the chamber was narrow, lined with control panels built directly into the stone frame. No open space, no excess. Every surface had a purpose. The control frame extended forward, anchored directly into the hull. It wasn't mounted, it was part of the structure itself. Every movement applied to it would carry through the vessel without delay. Behind the control positions, the rod array curved along the rear wall. Each rod sat in an individual socket, suspended within a constrained range of motion. They were not loose. They resisted immediately when touched, as if they were already under load before any adjustment was made. Lyra set the case down and opened it. The rods inside were not identical. Each one carried slightly different etching patterns, fine, precise markings cut along their length. They weren't decorative. They defined how each rod would respond when displaced, how it would interpret pressure, heat, and vibration through the medium around the vessel. She lifted the first rod and set it into its housing. It did not slide cleanly, it pressed back. She adjusted her grip, aligned it again, and applied steady force until each one locked into place with a soft click. Pressure seals are holding. Her voice sounded hollow in the space. Outside, the water struck the dock harder than before. The surge carried higher, spilling across the edge and running over the stone toward the vessel's base. Arson turned back toward the harbor opening. Beyond it, the ocean no longer held its line. Their horizon had collapsed into movement, rising sections of water that didn't crest like waves, but lifted in uneven masses before falling back into themselves. Structures in the distance leaned at angles that should have already failed. Some had. One tower dimmed, then went dark.
You're not just measuring, he said quietly.
Salat met his eyes. No. She stepped closer to the vessel and lowered her voice. There are stations along the ridge, she said. Deep structures, older than the outer towers. We stopped using them generations ago when the surface grid expanded. Arson frowned.
Why?
Because we didn't need them anymore, she replied. Then after a pause, or we thought we didn't. Arson looked toward the ocean.
You think they're still active?
I think they were designed to operate without us, Salat said. If anything beneath the crust is still stabilizing movement, it will be there. Another tremor hit, stronger this time. The vessel shifted against the moorings. One of the engineers called out,
"Hull locks are ready."
Salat stepped back from the hull and turned sharply. "Release sequence on my mark," she said. Arson stepped forward.
The last transport ship is waiting for our remaining crew. Everyone else has already boarded. We will load as soon as the vessel dives.
Salat nodded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Release," The moorings disengaged. Not all at once, each lock released in sequence, allowing the vessel to adjust gradually instead of being thrown free. The vessel lifted slightly as its buoyancy systems activated, designed not to rise, but to balance. The slight lift was just enough to reduce the drag along its underside. Then it began to move forward into the canal. It did not cut through the water cleanly. The water surged around it unstable, pushing from multiple directions at once. It did not fight the motion. It adjusted to it. Each surge that struck its sides shifted its alignment, and the vessel responded by redistributing that force along its length instead of resisting it directly. Arson watched as the craft reached the harbor opening. Beyond it, the open ocean heaved in slow, heavy swells. For a moment, the vessel paused at the harbor threshold. Then it tilted downward and disappeared beneath the surface. A brief cheer echoed across the harbor. Then Arson turned back toward the remaining Atlanteans, his voice booming, sweeping one arm in the direction of the last transport vessel and grabbing Salat's hand with the other.
"Evacuate now! Get to the transport ship! Move, move, move!"
The city continued to disintegrate behind them, no longer recognizable. Chapter 1. The surface closed over the glass in a single motion. Not a splash, a continuous sheet. Light shifted immediately. The water turned from green to deep blue. The sharp reflection from above softened, spreading into a diffuse glow that filtered down instead of striking directly. Keel adjusted the descent angle as the vessel passed beneath the outer ridge of the harbor floor. Above them, the city distorted into fractured silhouettes through the shifting water. Then it was gone. Darkness closed in. Only the forward lamps remained, cutting a narrow path through suspended sediment and drifting particles. Inside the vessel, the change was not just visual. The sound dropped away. Wind vanished first, then the irregular slap of water against the hull. What replaced it was not silence. It was pressure. A constant, low presence that sat behind every other sensation, carried through the structure rather than the air. Keel's hands stayed on the control frame. He didn't grip it tightly. The frame didn't respond to force. It responded to contact. Pressure applied through his palms, translating into directional adjustments, each one returning feedback through resistance in the material itself. The vessel did not move freely. Every correction required negotiation with the water around it. "Hold it," Lyra said.
"I am."
The vessel dipped forward, cutting into the water instead of dropping through it. The descent was controlled, but not smooth. The walls of the descent channel appeared ahead, steep, uneven, lined with mineral growths and old structural anchors embedded deep into the rock. Some of them still hummed faintly, their systems not entirely dead. Currents struck from uneven angles, pushing along one side, then shifting before the correction could fully settle. Keel adjusted constantly. Not large movements, small, precise shifts, each one timed to meet the pressure instead of reacting after it passed. Behind him, the rods began to respond, not audibly, through vibration. A fine, continuous tremor spread through the rear structure, carried forward into the floor and up through the control panel. Lyra placed her hand on the nearest rod. It resisted immediately. She pulled it slightly toward her. It pushed back harder. She held it there, waited. The resistance stabilized. Then she shifted it laterally by a fraction. The effect traveled through the vessel. The vibration changed, not in strength, but in pattern. Less scattered, more aligned. "Front is taking uneven lift," she said. "It's pushing up from below."
"I can feel it."
Another current struck. This one didn't lift, it twisted. The vessel tilted sharply to one side before Keel corrected it, redistributing the angle before the rotation could carry through the full length of the hull. Above them, the surface distorted further. It no longer appeared as a clean boundary. It broke into shifting layers, light bending through moving water that folded in on itself, where pressure surged upward. Shadows moved through it, large, slow, then gone. Lyra didn't comment on that, not yet. "Depth?" she said. Keel adjusted the frame. The vessel angled downward further. The resistance increased immediately. Water thickened around them, not physically, but in response. Movement required more input. The frame carried that back into Keel's hands, each adjustment meeting stronger opposition than before. A long crack came into view along the trench wall. It was not there in the original maps. Water streamed from it in thin, rapid currents, carrying heat. The vessel shuddered slightly as it passed. Lyra adjusted one of the rods. "Pressure rate is increasing," she said. "Fast." Keel slowed the descent. "Hold steady. Let it stabilize," she said gently. But it didn't stabilize. The crack in the trench wall widened suddenly and the rock shifted. A section of the trench wall split open with a deep grinding movement that transitioned directly through the water and into the hull. Lyra grabbed the side brace. "That's not residual movement," she gasped. "Nope," Keel replied, eyes fixed ahead. From within the opening, something moved. Keel adjusted the forward lamps. The light reached into the fracture. The rods intensified their vibration. Lyra adjusted another, then another. Each movement required force, not enough to strain, but enough to feel the boundary of resistance and hold it there until the system accepted the change. They weren't activating anything, they were tuning alignment. The vessel wasn't independent. It was interacting with the environment, and the environment was getting stronger. The trench floor dropped sharply beneath the vessel as it cleared the last edge of the continental shelf. Keel reduced thrust to keep the descent controlled. The hull creaked once, then settled. Outside the forward viewport, the water had gone completely black. The external lights cut a narrow cone through suspended particles, revealing a steep wall of basalt layered in fractured sheets. Thin white bacterial mats clung to the rock where chemical seepage leaked from hairline cracks. Lyra adjusted the intake filters and leaned closer to the glass. "Temperature is rising," she said. "Not from the surface." Keel nodded. He could see it now. Distortion in the water ahead. Heat. The trench floor wasn't stable. They descended another 30 meters. The first vent came into view without warning. Tall chimneys some 3 meters high vented continuous streams of mineral-rich fluid into the water. The discharge spread upward in thick, dark plumes. Around the base of each vent, dense clusters of tube worms extended from white mineral casings, their red plumes retracting and extending in slow cycles. Small crustaceans moved between them, feeding along the bacterial layers. Keel adjusted the thrusters, feeling the vibrations of the engines echo along the frame. Outside the viewport, the walls of the trench rose like jagged cliffs, encrusted with mineral deposits and brittle coral. Streams of hydrothermal fluid leaked from fissures, clouding the water in rust-colored plumes. Tiny crabs darted along the rocks, their shells reflecting faint bioluminescence from the vent worms clustered above. Lyra monitored the readings, her fingers moving quickly over the instruments. She didn't speak. Keel felt the vibration through the hull, a slow grinding shift beneath the seafloor. Something massive lurked below them. The first shadow appeared, long and curling. At first it seemed part of the rock, but it moved independently. A body, long and thick, moved parallel to the trench wall. A creature. Its surface was segmented, not scaled, plates overlapping, each one dull and matte. It seemed to be absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. The creature's motion was controlled, steady against the upward flow of the vents. It looked at least 20 meters long as it glided along the trench wall. Its fins looked narrow, angled, to catch upward currents from the vents. Keel held his breath as it passed. A cluster of tomb worms shivered in its wake. Lyra's voice was tight. "Is that—" Keel nodded. He had seen reports of Leviathan specimens before, preserved in the records of explorers lost decades prior, but nothing this complete. Lyra leaned forward, focused on the viewport. The creature's body undulated smoothly, the pressure of its surroundings folding around it like second skin. Its head was elongated, lined with sensory filaments, and along the Leviathan's back, ridges of reflective cartilage caught the faint glow of bioluminescent organisms clinging to the trench walls. Keel held position.
Record everything.
Lyra activated full capture. The head passed through the light. It was narrow, forward set, with no visible eyes in the traditional sense. Instead, a band of sensory tissue ran along the front ridge, faintly textured, reacting to the water movement. Along its underside, rows of smaller appendages adjusted continuously, stabilizing its position. It did not react to the vessel. It already knew they were there. Far beneath the submersible, outside the reach of the lights, another observer watched. She remained still against the trench wall, her body aligned with the rock to reduce drag. The water pressure pressed uniformly around her body. It was not uncomfortable. Her physiology had adapted to it generations earlier. Thin membranes along her neck moved slowly, extracting oxygen from the surrounding water. Her eyes adjusted to low light without strain. She tracked the vessel first, surface construction reinforced but inefficient, too rigid for the deep pressure variation. It would not survive a full trench collapse. She could see two figures inside. Their movements were visible through the forward section when the light shifted at the right angle. She turned her attention to the fracture. The larger organism moving within it was not part of her group. It had migrated upward from the deeper regions, drawn by the change in heat and flow. It would not remain. The vessel, however, would, unless it failed. She pushed away from the rock with a controlled motion and moved downward along the trench face, staying outside of the disturbance field created by the vessel's lights. She circled once behind the vessel, small controlled movements along her limbs and tail, then moved closer to the fracture opening. The vibration increased. Her hand brushed the surface of the basalt, searching. There it was, a faint repeating vibration, not natural. She followed it. Chapter 2. Lyra and Keel peered into the darkness. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The connection between them had settled the moment they'd sealed themselves inside the vessel. Not something forced. It was simply there, emerging naturally from training and survival. Thoughts traveled as impressions. Weight, direction, urgency. Depth did not arrive as distance. It arrived as weight. Not on their bodies, the vessel held that back, but through every interface they touched. The frame pressed harder into Keel's palms. The floor carried a denser vibration. Even the rods resisted more sharply, as if the medium around them had thickened into something closer to structure than fluid. Visibility shortened, not from darkness, from density. The Leviathan angled downward, away from the vent field. Lyra adjusted the tracking. She observed the creature, noting its motion patterns, the way it navigated thermal currents, the small fish that clung to its side as if drawn to its mass. She recorded each detail silently. The knowledge they carried, the techniques, the instruments, the mission, was more important than any single life form. Yet both Keel and Lyra could not stop themselves from marveling at the scale of what remained hidden beneath the oceans. Keel's voice broke the silence.
It's changing direction.
Where is it going? Lyra scanned the formation. She could sense movement across the edge of the light field. Visibility out the forward viewport became minimal at best. Fine particulate matter filled the water ahead, catching light and holding it, turning open space into a field that limited depth perception. Keel reduced forward motion, not stopping, slowing enough to read movement instead of reacting blindly to it. The currents changed here. They no longer passed around the vessel. They pulled, not strongly enough to drag them off course, but consistently enough to influence their path. That's not surface drift. The front is taking uneven lift. It's pushing up from below, Lyra said. I can't see the Leviathan anymore, can you?
I can feel it, Keel responded, adjusting against the current. I can't see it anymore either. It's moved out of the light.
The vessel resisted, then aligned. Another current struck. Fighting the current created instability in the vessel. Following it created control. The vessel lifted again, higher this time. The front edge rose first, tilting the entire body upward before settling back down. The motion carried through the structure. Keel felt it through his feet, through the seat, through the frame beneath his hands. The vessel was built to absorb it, to spread the force outward instead of letting it strike in one place. But the pressure was building faster than it could settle. Lyra reached back without turning around and adjusted one of the rods. They were affixed into the rear roof of the control space, arranged into a curved line behind the two seats. Each one was the length of a forearm, set into a socket that allowed a small range of movement. They did not spin or slide freely. They resisted. Every change required deliberate pressure. Her fingertips wrapped around one and pulled it slightly toward her. The rod pushed back. She held it there until the resistance steadied, then shifted it a fraction to the side. The response came through the vessel almost immediately. The vibration underfoot changed, not stronger or weaker, just more even, less scattered. The front end is taking too much, she said. It's pushing up from below.
I can feel it,
Keel confirmed. Another surge rolled through the water. This one did not lift them cleanly. It struck along one side, forcing the vessel to tilt sharply before Keel corrected it. He leaned into the frame, guiding the balance back down before the angle increased. Lyra adjusted another rod. This one sat higher than the others. She pressed it downward, then held it until the resistance evened out. The vessel responded by tightening its movement. The single drift that had followed each surge disappeared. The hull held its line more cleanly. It's better below, she said.
For now.
Keel's eyes stayed forward. The water thickened as they descended further. It pressed closer to the hull, slowing their movement in a way that felt steady and constant. Each adjustment he made required more input than it had closer to the surface. The frame carried that back into his hands, letting him feel the weight of it. Behind them, the rods continued their low vibration, a fine, constant movement that ran through the seat frames and into the floor. When Lyra adjusted them, that movement shifted. It tightened or spread, or settled into a more stable pattern. Keel adjusted their angle again, guiding them deeper. Inside the vessel, a faint warmth spread through the floor, rising up through Keel's boots. The water ahead darkened. It carried more material now. Fine particles suspended through it caught the light and held it. The space in front of the vessel shortened. Visibility narrowed, forcing Keel to rely more on the shape of movement than clear sight. He slowed their descent. Below them, something began to define itself. Edges began to form out of the haze, not visible as structures yet, but as interruption. The movement of the water shifted around a fixed presence, broad, uneven surfaces rising from below, cutting into the drifting field of particles. The water moved differently around it, slower near the surface, faster along the edges, creating faint currents that twisted and folded in on themselves. The pull strengthened slightly as they approached. Keel felt it through the frame before he could see it, a steady draw, not strong enough to drag them, but strong enough to influence their path. He adjusted against it. The vessel resisted for a moment, then settled into alignment with the pull instead of fighting it. Lyra adjusted the rods again. This time slower, more deliberate. Each change brought a sharper response through the vessel, as if they were entering a region where the surrounding forces were more organized. Lyra exhaled slowly. That's not rock causing the current. Something's directing flow down here, she said. Lyra looked forward, her focus narrowing. That's not a natural current. Keel didn't answer. He was already compensating. From the dark waters far below the vessel, the observer already knew where the Leviathan was heading. She had reached the source, a structure buried under sediment and mineral buildup, extending out from the trench wall. Smooth surfaces beneath layers of growth, artificial geometry partially exposed where the rock had shifted. A station, still active. The vibration came from inside. She placed her hand against the surface. The system responded. Chapter 3. Keel kept one hand steady on the forward controls. The other hand adjusted thrust and short, controlled inputs to counter the shifting current. The hull transmitted every change in pressure. It was not constant. It pulsed, rising and falling in uneven intervals. Lyra leaned closer to the viewport.
Can you see anything?
Keel asked quietly, as he angled the forward lights downward. Before she could answer, something passed directly beneath the vessel. The first solid form did not appear clearly. It emerged through absence. The particulate field thinned. The water stopped drifting evenly. The space ahead opened into a darker, more stable region where movement followed defined paths instead of scattered turbulence. Far below them, through the clearing space, the first edges of something solid began to emerge from the depths. The ridge. Not a sharp structure, a gradual rise. Massive. Ancient. The structure rose higher as they approached. Its surface was dark, worn, not smooth. It carried layered formations, mineral growth, fractured sections, embedded structures that did not match natural formation patterns. Wide spans interrupted by deep recesses, openings that disappeared into black. Keel kept the vessel steady as he descended toward it. He felt something shift inside his chest and cautiously slowed the vessel further, almost hovering now as they neared the outer edge of the structure. The water here pressed harder, wrapping around the hull in a way that felt different from open descent, tighter, more contained. The vessel did not hover easily. Lyra's grip steadied. It's pulling. Keel felt it the same second she did. The water itself had changed direction, slipping along the surface of the structure and drawing everything with it. The pull from the ridge created directional bias, drawing them forward even when he held the frame steady. Lyra felt it through the rods. They're reacting differently, she said.
Explain.
His eyes fixed on one of the openings ahead. It wasn't large, just wide enough to suggest passage. They're not resisting evenly anymore. She adjusted one slightly. The response was immediate and stronger. The vessel shifted alignment faster than before. Lyra held the rod in place, stabilizing it. This isn't just pressure, she said. There's structure in the field. Keel looked forward. The ridge extended beyond what they could see, and somewhere within it, something was still active. Keel looked back at Lyra. He felt the shared thought form between them. His hands flexed over the frame. The vessel responded, and slowly, carefully, they moved toward the dark. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining me for Echoes of My Imagination. My name is Tracy Lee. Don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and follow, and I'll catch you next time.